for those who missed this and will be able to come back later. So what I want to do, hopefully, let me see, you're able to see my screen. Okay. I want to show you three documents right now that are important for you to download. Those documents are found in the resource section under System Archetypes. And can all of you see, are you seeing this document? I just want to make sure. Okay, good. So the first one is Daniel Kim, and Lennon one is Applying Systems Archetypes. So you can just scroll through it. This is from Pegasus Communication. I'd like you to get a copy of this. It will help you greatly in understanding what I'll take you through to help to build that out, because these architects will be important tools for you. So that's one. The other one is What are System Archetypes? So this one is a little bit more detailed. Will tie into a lot about what I'll talk about tonight as we go through these particular tools. So I'd like to make sure that you download this one also. And then the other one is Shifting the Burden Study Notes. And what's important about this one is basically what it will allow you to do is to play around with a way of looking at the implications of what a lot of these archetypes are about. So those are three documents that I'd like you to download. They hopefully will make sense to you as we move forward. And then after you and your reflective conversation teams have a chance to look at those, if a particular team wants to individually talk to me about these in more detail, we can do it. So I just want to make sure that you know that you get these three. All right. So let me stop the share, and I want to come back to a new share screen, which will be this guy over here. So this is basically, I'm going to take you through for about 45 minutes or so, a little overview of the fifth discipline and what these archetypes are. The fifth discipline basically is the book that Senge wrote back in 1990. It's been updated, but what's important about it is it will help to get you to look at some other concepts around systems thinking and your leadership development as you think about organizations and organizational change. So my little Delbert for you this week ties into this idea of strategic planning. And I always like the second one, where when you're doing visioning and understanding what it is it's basically hallucinating about the future. And as Delbert says, you also have to pretend it's useful, and that really sounds hard. I'm sure most of you have been through strategic planning processes over your career, been involved in those, and it's something that over time we need to really begin to look at, because it becomes so locked in, so predictable that many times organizations just do it because they have to do it, but they really don't understand the dynamics of it. So when we look at the fifth discipline, it should give you a little bit of better sense of what this concept is all about. So before we do that, I want to talk about this activity that's coming up, because a couple of you have emailed me about it, and I will talk a little bit more about it in my voice announcement Sunday. And when you come into next week, you will see the little diagram that you will be using. Also, what I'm thinking about doing is extending this past week 6 and putting it into maybe a week 7. And as you look at this, because I want you to spend a little time talking about this, and so you'll demonstrate your understanding of this. But really, what I want you to do is, you've been looking about assumptions about your leadership, having a look at that. You've sent me your change theory. You will be getting separate audio files back from me this week into beginning of next week that will give my perception of your theory of change. So the way I like doing that is to look through your paper, reflect upon it, and then give you a verbal concept about it. And then if you have questions about what I give you, then you can contact me. So you will be getting those you'll start seeing those coming to you tomorrow, and it will come as an audio file, about 3 or 4 minutes long. We used to have, when the email was working properly, we had voice email in Blackboard, and it was great. I was able to use that, but voice is down also the same way, putting attachments to your emails through the one that's in Blackboard. So it doesn't work, and that's why a lot of you have trouble, being able to listen to that, my Sunday voice announcements, and that's why I have to send you different files. So anyway, so what you're going to basically do with this, so in your team, you're going to collectively come up with a leadership issue that the team thinks is important, and then you're going to analyze that issue, that event that you're looking at using the iceberg structure. So for example, one you could use is, from a leadership point of view, is the presidential election, and analyze the presidential election based upon using the iceberg. Or you have an issue within your organization, an event that you're trying to look at and trying to understand, you can utilize the iceberg. So I'll have a schematic for you that you basically fill in. Then after you do the analysis, I really want you to identify what vision is present within the organization or the event because of your analysis using, looking at patterns of relationship structure and mental models. And then as you look at that, say, okay, if I look at this event and the organization that event's taking place in, here's what the vision of that organization is all about. We'll talk about vision in a couple minutes. So that's what you're going to do. You can do it, as a schematic. You can do as Prezi. You can use your choice of what you want to use. But you need to support any of your concepts citing any of the material that you're reading in this course, whether it be Sengi's work or references that other points of view. I do want you to give me a reference page of the people that you're using to support your analysis. All right? So that's what that activity is about. And I'll say a little bit more about it on Sunday, and when you go in next Monday, you'll see the framework. You'll be able to download the framework. So any questions about this, or does that make sense to most of you? If not, please let me know now, or send me an email. So that's what that's about. So this is a team process. All right, so I'm guessing that this does make sense to you, or when you get into it, I will get emails from you guys or text messages related to this. Okay, so what I want to talk about is the fifth discipline, where the material that you have in the Sengi book that you're reading now really comes out of his work that he started back in the 90s. Well, actually started a lot sooner than that in some of the videos that you look at Peter Senge. And the 5 disciplines are this. And the first one he calls is personal mastery. And as you look at this, I want you to think about your organization and whether or not it lends itself to personal mastery. And so really, as you look at this concept of personal mastery, it really is what we would call staff development or training within an organization, because it's designed to increase personal capacity to really create the results that the organization's going after. It's a way to really allow the individuals within that to develop themselves towards really that shared sense of purpose of where we're going. And he says that a learning organization, an organization that is able to adapt itself to change, definitely has a focus on this idea of personal mastery. And again, if you're in the school environment, whether it be at the K-12 or university, we generally look at that as going out to conferences, doing presentations, building your own skills, taking whatever it is. If you are in the business world or in non-educational environments, we generally look at that as training, both internal training or external training in terms of the organization. So training and staff development are really designed to look at personal mastery. And for each and every one of you who are in this program, obviously you're trying to build your own capacity and your own personal mastery. If you're paying it for yourself, obviously it's for you. If your organization is helping to pay for it, obviously the organization does have some commitment to this idea. So it is an important concept to think about, and the stronger a organization is towards that idea of personal mastery, then the closer it is to what's called a learning organization or a commitment towards learning in an organization. So as you become a leader, that one of the things that you need to understand is that that's important to build capacity within an organization. And also, it's an interesting area where I know a lot of my students in the past and also in this program do a lot of their research into this concept of staff development or training within organizations. So it's also a good area to think about doing your study. Okay, so that's the first one he talks about. And as I go through this, you have any questions, just jump in or, put something up in the chat room, because I'll be able, to see that there is a chat in there. So the second one he talks about is mental models. And we've talked a lot about this up to this point, but really what the mental model is, again, is your ability to understand how you look at the world, but more importantly, from a leadership point of view, is your ability to surface those models or those assumptions that people within your organization have in their heads, because the more you're able to make them overt, the better chance of creating a sense of shared vision within any organization or a shared sense of purpose happens with that. So the mental model concept is extremely important, and it's something leaders should encourage people to do. And how it comes about is making sure that there is a sense of trust in the organization so that conversations can be deeper conversations instead of just surface conversations, like how's the weather, how's things going, or never really saying what's on your mind. So as a leader, it becomes extremely important for you to understand on how to create a trustful environment that allows people to actually expose what their thinking is and their perceptions in order to allow for the organization to collectively shape its future. So that's important. And it's one that many times is never, ever, really pushed in organizations. And we see this. And if you think about your own organization and whether or not you have that ability or you feel enough trust to say really what you believe in order to improve the organization, as opposed to, saying it and then getting slapped down for it or whatever. So that's how this second discipline becomes extremely important for really creating a organization that is in a constant stage of learning. Any comments, questions so far? Okay, now the third discipline then he talks about is what I've been talking about, a shared vision. And really, we use this word, well, we're all going to sit down and do a vision for the organization. And we come up with a vision statement. Well, to what extent you don't have a vision statement, you might have a purpose statement, but a vision encompasses a much broader sense of a story of collectively how we seek what the future is going to be. And that it's extremely important to understand that in organizations, many times you will see two types of visions. One vision is what you would call a positive vision, which is focused on the question of what are we trying to seek for the future, versus a negative vision. And I don't mean, when I use the word negative, I'm not saying a bad vision, but anytime you see the word anti in front of a word, that generally connotes a negative vision from the point of view that it's trying to change something, such as anti-bullying, anti-drugs, sexual harassment, any terminology that has the word anti in front of it generally is coming from a sense of trying to solve a problem that hurts the organization or hurts a community. So there's those two types of vision. One is one that is steeped in a question of what are we trying to seek for the future. The other one is steeped in what are we trying to alleviate because it hurts the organization. That's why I say it's negative, not meaning bad, and the positive as meaning good. It's just the way in which you look at what we're trying to accomplish. So that many times I think is important to, for a leader to understand the distinction between those things. But generally, when you're looking at this sense of vision, really probably the word you should substitute for vision is shared sense of the future, which obviously is two words, but that really is what you're attempting to do. What do we collectively think we're going after? So that's the third discipline that becomes important for an organization. So we have this personal mastery, we have the idea of mental models, and now we have the concept of shared vision. And then the fourth one discipline he talks about is this idea of team learning. And really, what team learning is based upon is transforming the conversational and the collective thinking skills so the group of people can reliably develop the intelligence and the ability greater than the sum of the individual members of the talent that is there. Now, if you notice, what I have you do a lot of in this particular course is teaming. Because I believe that when you look at all of the data and all of the comments from CEOs and training managers about the future, that the workforce of the future, the way in which we will function in the future, a lot of times has to deal with teaming. And if you look at that, if you had a chance to watch McChrystal's video yet, General McChrystal's video, you hear him talking about that need to create this type of conversation and collective thinking that allows for the group, not group think. That's very important, not group think, but the group to be able to develop the communication and conversational skills that allows out of that collective a much more robust outcome than if you were all doing it individually. So I had a choice on this project you're coming up with, is that I could have you do them as individuals in terms of that task that you have coming up, but I'd rather you do it in the context of a team being highly focused on the awareness of these disciplines that we're talking about. That teaming many times, and those of you who are in a K-12 environment know that a lot of times, kids and people don't like working in teams because, and parents particularly, always say, well, what ends up happening is that the smart kids do all the work and those kids who slack off don't do anything and everybody gets credit for it. Well, that's because we don't teach people what the purpose of teaming is, and particularly cross-disciplinary teaming is an extremely important component dealing with the complexities that we're looking at, both from an economic point of view and from just human relation point of view, that becomes more and more important. So this sense of team learning is paramount to the development of a true learning organization. And then finally, the last discipline he talks about, the fifth discipline then, is obviously systems thinking. And again, the same way you're working in a team where the collective interaction and the collective intelligence that emerges out of that is much greater than the individual parts. Well, as I've told you all along, and obviously hopefully you've gotten this at this point, is that if you're really going to deal with leading an organization, you need to understand the entire interactions and relationships in that organization in order to truly deal with problems or events within that organization. Because the more you understand the forces that are at play, the types of interactions that shape the behavior of people within an organization, as I said to you before, this concept of structure shapes behavior of people over time, the better chance you'll have to deal with those things that Linsky and Heifetz and their other colleague talk about in relationship to adaptive thinking and adaptive problems and technical thinking and technical problems. So these are the 5 disciplines that underpin what you're reading in Senge particularly, but they also underpin what you're reading in relationship to Fullen, and you're also reading in relationship to Akoff when he talks about the need to rethink organizational design, particularly towards the educational system that he writes about in that book. So let me stop at this point and see what your thinking is or what comments you have related to these 5 disciplines.
Hi, Dr. Gould. It's David McDevitt, and hello, classmates. Just the mental model aspect of it's, I think, a vitally important aspect of getting organizational change and, working with the staff members. The problem that I see is, as the educational leader, sometimes I have to hold teachers and staff members accountable. And, they get angry and, due to confidentiality, I can't tell people what I'm doing or why I'm doing it. And, I think that's a major hurdle that we have to overcome as educational leaders. And I didn't know if you could share any experience with that. It's a piece that I struggle with. And if I'm aware of the situation, I have to investigate and act upon the information that I've collected. But boy, it really damages that mental model. And I think it separates, the staff from the administration. It always seems like there's a separation between the two. General McChrystal talked about going on some of those battalion missions with his group and really got the entire group to buy into him. And, he worked side by side with one of those, a group of staff members, and they all stayed with him and really look up to him. But, that's the struggle that I see with that mental model aspect.
Well, as I was listening to you think about one of the things that happens is that we have to have an honest discussion, I think, particularly because you're a superintendent of schools, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you answer to us board, and you have school board policy. So if you think about the structure, there are certain things, obviously, you cannot talk about. And I think, within an organization, people understand that. So when you're dealing with personnel issues and things of that nature, you can't talk about those because there's legal ramifications related to that. But what you also need to think about is, as a learning organization, as one that, and I think you talked about it in the past, how do we get scores to increase, or how do we forget getting scores increased? How do we get kids to become much more activated in learning and be developing a true sense of where we want to go and where they need to go? Well, that type of conversation then is one that needs to be open in a way that it brings many parties to the table to talk about that. So, for example, I use the example of that building that I, over a 3-year period of time, of just exposing teachers to different types of ideas, encouraging them to explore new types of ideas and how we can reorganize the day, how we can reorganize learning, etc. And I worked on creating a sense of trust over the things that they have control over. And what they have control over is the teaching, learning environment. And put that in the context of the total organization, because the shared sense of purpose is that we want to make sure that every kid goes through this learning environment in a way that they come out as a true learner. Now, I didn't say that they come out as they do well on scores and test scores and they really look good, but what we were focusing in on is, how do you get kids to want to become learners? How do we do that? So what I'm saying to you is that type of discussion and my willingness within the organization to allow teachers to go out to different types of workshops, to expose them to different ideas, starts building up their personal mastery, allows those things to happen. But more importantly is, I tried to convey the sense that I'm going to be as transparent, as open with the things that I can, in order to allow you to experiment without the fear of getting nailed for failure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that.
So that's what we're talking about. We're, obviously, if, and I'll tell you, give me another example. In another district, what I did was, instead of, dealing with teachers who do not perform well, etc., I created a whole new group of really peer coaching concepts. Eventually, what happened is we had less and less problems with teachers having problems in terms of their instructional work, etc. That what started to happen was there was this culture of shared learning responsibility, where teachers became advocates for each other, and when one was having trouble, they would work with each other. So that was a shift. And I was moving away from the traditional supervisory role to do away with that, to create more of a learning organization.
Yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction with the instructional strategies, and it's kind of slow, but I'm leading by example, working with the administration. But the little piece that I was talking about, and it's kind of a sidebar, is social media. For example, something that I'm working on right now is Facebook posts that teachers put out there that offend the local community, and have to investigate and hold staff accountable. And I try to educate them, and we talk about it in in-service days. But something outside of the instructional side of things are impacting what we got going on within the classroom, low staff morale and the separation between the teaching staff and the administration. Just, the craziest, I shouldn't even be investigating that kind of stuff. We should be acting like professionals, and we should be focusing in on the instructional side of things. But I just shared that example because those are barriers that we have to overcome as educational leaders.
So let me ask the rest of you, how would you comment about this? What's your thoughts about it?
Well, in terms of social media, I recently had an administrator from a building ask me how to advise his teachers, and asked how I advise my staff. And we have a general rule that, you don't post, your personal page is your personal page, and each building has a social media page within our district. So there's certainly a gray area, but I've heard of other districts in other states. For example, I know there's a district in Maryland that has a very, very strict social media policy, where teachers were actually asked at one point to close all social media accounts. And I think they've moved past that. But I think that's it's a controversial issue. And I think that it's important to lay the ground rules so there's no confusion and there is no room for error, especially when you're talking about, the community being involved, and you have to be aware of the impression that you're giving to the community as well.
Okay. Any other feedback?
I work in a little bit different field where I work with college athletics, and we have a whole kind of department that talks about communication. There's an athletic communications office that comes and talks to us pretty regularly about things, and really tries to impose, to educate us that anything that we're saying that we wouldn't want to be put in a newspaper or put out there publicly is something that we need to restrict to those that we're communicating with, and really tries to frame the concept of what social media means within a broader context of what people have access to, and to really look at it more as you're not having an individual conversation when you're putting this out publicly. And I think maybe because of the dynamic that I work in, we kind of have a better understanding of the effects that can have, because we see it happen with students who might not portray themselves the best on social media, but we also talk about it as a staff.
Okay. So a question you need to think about is, how do you generate a conversation within the organization that addresses that issue that goes beyond an administrator's role or a teacher's role? The question is, if you have a sense of a shared purpose of what and who we are and where we're going and what we need to do, then how do you generate that conversation that allows for a true discussion? Because you're running into some very interesting cultural issues. You're running into First Amendment issues. You're running into all types of issues as it relates to that. And there's actually law that, it's like teachers who go out in the community to get drunk and get themselves in trouble. You can be fired for intemperance or any of those things. So there are certain types of laws that are out there. But the bigger question I would ask is, all right, so if we have teachers, and what I'm going to surmise is, so some teachers are maybe posting some things on our social media that might be derogatory, to the organization. The question then, I wonder from myself, as if I'm the superintendent there, I'm sitting there, I begin to ask myself, okay, why is this happening? What in the organization is allowing this to take place? That becomes a question. And then how do we generate the type of conversation that allows people to feel secure to honestly talk about that without retribution? See, if you can get to that level and you're able to do those types of things, then I believe it sets a different tone where ideas can begin to emerge and you can begin to talk about this. Obviously, social media is a very difficult one. Well, look at a presidential election right now in relationship to social media. So there's a good example of how this stuff has it has freed up for the flow of information. But the question then comes even from a learning point of view is, how does information and how should it flow? What's our responsibility? What's our responsibility as educators, to deal with this within our community? And then how do you bring the community into that? That's the type of conversation we need to begin to foster as a leader who's going to think systemically, who's going to at least allow people to surface their assumptions that are important in order to carry out what our vision or purpose of the organization is. And quite frankly, if those things are happening, then there's not a well-articulated purpose or sense of where we want to go. And that's what you have to go after first, because then you can start dealing with these things. And then it's interesting because this next section I'm going to take you into, these archetypes, they're great tools for you to discover what type of conversations and what type of actions are going on within your organization. So these become extremely important leadership skills, as you look at that. And then, as I said to you, on Sunday, when you looked at Peter Senge's concept when he's talking about the oil and gas, industry to that gentleman, okay, how does that translate into, a educational environment? And when you look at McChrystal's concept, how do those two things integrate together in relationship to creating this thing called a learning organization? So that's what I want you to kind of grapple with that, because that's going to become extremely important in looking at this. And when you look at Linsky and Heifetz, and then they're talking about, the difference between the technical aspect of it. So when you're talking about, well, how am I going to deal with, teachers and that, you're really dealing with a technical problem there, as opposed to what's the real adaptive change process that has to take place that can make this a much more understandable process and get more people involved in it. So that's what these tools are all about. Okay, any other comments around these right now before I move on? Or any other points you'd like to raise? See, and it's interesting. I want to give it, like you talk about the athletic department. So we create within the organization the Department of Communications on how to talk. So what we do is we fragment out so much of this stuff that, okay, I'm in that department and that's my role and that's what I'm supposed to do. But, if you don't understand the relationships, that are being created and going across boundaries, that the more we stay in these silos, and sure you've all heard, well, we all function in silos. We all shake our heads, yeah, we function in silos. Well, in order to break through that, you have to think across boundaries, because these problems are complex and they really deal with human interaction. Until you can deal with that, until you understand that and how you can restructure and reshape an organization, even though, certain people have certain responsibility, that's okay. But it's important that we communicate across our boundaries, that becomes more important for the greater good. That's why most strategic plans fail. And all of you have been through that. Generally what happens is, boom, they're put up on the shelves and they really are not part of our daily consciousness or our daily actions. So these 5 things are those types of things that can help you to start to think about that and to begin to shape your organization. And actually, when you do that next project that I'm asking you to do, some of these things you're bringing up are kind of interesting to put into that framework of that iceberg and see what you come up with. Okay? All right. So basically then, what this is so these disciplines then, to conclude on this part, is really they give you the capacity of a human community to shape its future. That's what it's about. And specifically really to sustain the processes of change that will be required to do these things. So open communication, building trust with an organization, knowing what the boundaries are that allow for open and generative conversations to take place, knowing that there are certain legal requirements that, there's things that you cannot talk about, but people understand that in the structure of the organization. There are things that you cannot talk about. And I'm sure you've all been through it where you see an organization, look, and we can't talk about it because legally we can't say anything about it. It might drive you nuts, like, why can't we not? Well, you can't, because we got laws that say you can't say something until, finally it comes out. But what these things do is they're really building the capacity for your communities to begin to get a sense that it can shape its own future. And I also want you to think about, about yourselves within your present organizations, do you have a sense that you help to shape the direction that organization's going in? Do you feel a commitment to it? So that's the type of question, you need to ask yourself as you're looking at it. So with that, I'm going to briefly, and you'll have more time to look at those when you download those things I showed you at the beginning. So what Senge and his group and a lot of people in system thinking is they came up with a way of okay, how do you what's common in organizations, and how can we look at organizations from a series of stories that seem to be common to any type of organization. And so they came up with this idea of system stories through archetypes. And obviously, if those of you who remember Jungian psychology, the archetypes that he always talked about coming out of Jungian psychology, that's something for another day, but that's where the concept comes from. So thinking about reality and understanding systems behavior, obviously this right now. This is what you're going to be working with. And so, how can you use this type of framework within your organization? And that's what I'm trying to convince you to begin to understand, is that the more you understand these levels within the functioning of a daily operation of a system, it gives you the opportunity to really increase your leverage in understanding a particular problem or an event. And it also gives you an opportunity for understanding how to learn within an organization. So again, that's what that iceberg is about. That's what that structure is about. So one of the things that you need to think about is really how is feedback takes place within most organizations, and the transmission and the return of information. In many organizations, if you think about it, the flow of information goes from A to B to C to D to E, and it's linear. That's the way it goes. But in reality, when you begin to think about your own organization and you begin to think about how information flows, yeah, it goes there, but there's always feedback that takes place within these. Systems attempt to maintain stability through feedback loops. So A to B, well, B's going along, but when you get to E, if you think about whatever the event is or going on in E, it circles back and really impacts B, whereas when you go to A to B to C, well, what's going on in C might loop back into A and have impact on that. So what I'm saying to you is that in reality, all communication is nonlinear. It has feedback. It has consequences. It has delays. It has gaps. That's how reality. Very seldom do you see A, B, C, D, E followed within any organization, even though we all say, yeah, we try to do that. But it can't, because human communication is highly dynamic, and life is highly dynamic. You're always getting feedback loops. I always remember when I took a sociology class way back then, I always remember we had the warden of a prison come in, and you'd always talk about is that prisoners know what's going on throughout the entire organization. He said, prisoners know that I'm here at this place. Now, how does it happen? Because of feedback loops. You all know that. How did someone find out about that? Well, because of someone says something in an organization, so A to B to C, and then you're around, we always use the water cooler. Hey, did you know this was going on? Boom. Let's make some assumptions about something. Oh, then it comes back to A. Then A wants to try to figure out, how did they find out about that? That's life. That's how organizations work. And the more you understand feedback loops and how they function in an organization, the better you're going to understand the flow of information. So what that moves into then is that there's a series of tools that you look at, and the one is, and you'll look at these in those diagrams, those three documents I told you to get to download, is first is called causal loop diagrams. Now tonight I'm just giving you a quick overview, and you're going to go, there's so much stuff, but that's okay. I'm kind of priming the pump for you when you read about this in those three articles. So a causal loop diagram really is a way to represent very complex, interrelationships within an organization. They honestly help you to make very explicit what the pattern of communication is. And you'll see that in a couple minutes. And then the other one is behavior over time. And what that shows is the relationship of variables within any system, and it allows you to graph them out so that you can really begin to see how they're interrelated. And you'll see that in a couple minutes. So there's two types of tools that are very important in systems. One is called causal loop diagrams. The other is behavior over time. Now, I might do it next week. I'm going to post a video of first grade kids doing this stuff, actually using causal loop diagrams and behavior over time. And these kids are in an average school. They're not, some gifted group of kids. And you will see that you can teach anyone how to utilize this data. And it was really fantastic watching these little first graders dealing with a fight on a playground using both causal loop diagramming and behavior over time. So I don't want to put, as doctoral students to really challenge you, but I'll tell you, first grade kids can do this stuff. So I'll just put that out for you. So anyway, so how do you begin to look at this dynamic behavior using causal loops? Well, there's a couple ways of looking at it. One with if you're looking at growth. So you're looking at either accelerating growth or a spiraling process. So what you have is an activity. You have success with that activity. And what basically happens is, and what this is called, is a reinforcing loop. So what a reinforcing loop basically is that when you get successive changes constantly going in the same direction, you get a virtuous cycle. When you get a behavior that we don't want, we call it a vicious cycle. So, for example, most of you probably have a virtuous cycle with your money in a reinforcing loop. What might that be? So your activity is you put your money somewheres. And if it's in a virtuous cycle, what's happening to that money over time? This is not a quiz.
You're getting return on investment.
Yeah. So an investment is what? An investment, at least when the interest rates are high, for some of us, it could be a vicious cycle, but a virtuous cycle. So an investment is what? It keeps building. Interest keeps building on the amount. So it keeps accumulating. It accelerates over time. Now, what would be a vicious cycle? Can someone give me an example of a vicious cycle? Doesn't have to be of money. What is a major problem right now with a lot of people in this country at all levels, from high school through the entertainment industry, etc.? There's a certain product that they use, which leads to what?
Is it drugs?
Yes. Heroin. What's heroin lead to? Besides death, maybe. But it leads to what? Begins with an A.
Addiction.
Yeah, addiction. So addiction a lot of times is what? That's a pretty good example of a vicious cycle. So what happens is with addiction is you get hooked on heroin or cocaine or whatever it might be, and what happens to you over time. So it becomes a spiraling thing. Alcohol could be another one. So my point is that a reinforcing loop, all it does is it accelerates a situation or it spirals down a situation. So that's a causal loop, and they are called reinforcing loops. Now, the next type of loop that if you are interested and concerned about fixing a problem, well, here's what you have and you're defining a problem as self-correcting process keeps performance close to an expected or implicit goal. So making adjustments to fix a problem. So what you have here then is you have a problem, and then what takes place is you get a fix to that problem, and basically it should take care of the problem. So what that's called is a balancing loop, okay? That is a balancing loop. And so when you think about a balancing loop, they're simple on paper, but they're rather complex in life. And the reason is, really because you're running into people, and people have different ways of looking at things. Therefore, they can strongly affect the situation itself. But if you think about it in your house, every one of you have in your home a balancing loop mechanism. Now think about a self-correcting process that keeps something close to an expected level or performance. What might that example be of a balancing loop? And I'm almost positive you all have one in your house. And with the temperatures right now, you probably are using that. What might it be?
Thermostat
Yeah. So what's a thermostat do?
regulates the temperature.
Yeah, and you set it for whatever your temperature is, whether it's heat or whether it's cold, whether it's air conditioning or heat. So from a mechanical point of view, a thermostat is a pretty good example, because the problem is I want to maintain a certain level of temperature. The fix is I set it there. Therefore, it regulates that temperature. It keeps it where you want it. And that's basically what a balancing loop is. And in an organization, what you're trying to do is correct a problem within that organization. So those are the two. Those are the basics of systems dynamics: reinforcing loops and behavioral loops. So they become important. So how do you basically use them? Is you're either concerned, and this is in that handout that you have. You're either concerned about growth or fixing a problem. Very simply. Then what happens off of that is that's the reinforcing, fixing the problems. You're trying to balance the situation so that particular goal comes in. So you have a vicious or a virtuous cycle, and in the balancing loop, then what you end up with is that the R&B diagrams really help you to figure out how the feedback is creating behaviors that you want to take place. So causal loop mapping then, when you do it in a group, and I'm going to have you do that not this week, but probably in the 7th week, I'm going to have you do one of those within your teams just to practice it. So one of you will come up with a situation, and then you're going to do a causal loop diagram, try to figure out that situation. Because these are really interesting ways of getting visually to see what the problem is. The more you can visualize a problem and put it down and look at it collectively, the less chance you're going to have to put blame on people, except really what it does, it allows you to think about, oh, I didn't realize that was going on. That's what's very powerful about these particular ones. Now, there are a couple things in any type of organization and any type of goal setting or putting in any type of vision or direction are these things called delays. And in a balancing loop or in any causal loop, the delay always looks like this. So what they do is they can influence the system because they can accelerate and allow other forces, unintended consequences to come into play when there's delay. So in the R loop, the reinforcing loop, they can shake the confidence because the growth that you're trying to go after is not as quickly as expected. And my dear superintendent friend there knows that when a board tells you, okay, go in there and do something, put this new program in, and it doesn't go as quick as they want, well, it's because there's certain types of delays in the organization that will slow it down. Therefore, oh, that program was a failure. So that's what happens in a reinforcing loop. And then in a balancing loop, really what they do is they can really change the behavior of the system, because then people can get really impatient, and then you get these violent oscillations related to the issue. And we'll look at that in a minute. So delays are important factors to think about. And then the other one is this concept of gap. And what a gap in an organization basically comes down to is basically this, is that there's a discrepancy between that desired outcome that you're going after and the actual performance. And either visible to you as a shortfall or an event as a need or felt as a pressure. So a gap is that yeah, we want to increase the reading, but and you even said this, I think, in your district, that yeah, we're doing all these things, but our test scores aren't going up, or wherever they're at, they're not as good. Well, there's a gap there. The question is, what's causing the gap? So that's what you begin to look at. So the building blocks then of this behavior is that that's where you're looking at patterns of trends. And so this is where you start looking at behavior over time. So a reinforcing loop looks like this. If it is a virtuous, generally there's no limits on the growth. It goes up. Whereas it's a vicious cycle, it goes down. And when you have a balancing loop, you have fluctuation in the performance of behavior over time. It goes up and down, depending on what you do. Now, from a mechanical point of view, obviously, if you were to chart out and look at your electric bill and get the graphs of your electrical bill or your heating bill, you'll see fluctuations in oscillations over time, because really you're dealing with balancing situations with either the amount of electricity you're using over a period of time, which will fluctuate, or the amount of heating or oil or whatever. Where if you're looking at your returns on investment, if they're doing very well, then yeah, most likely you got a reinforcing loop and it keeps going. But then there was a book a long time ago, I think Donna Meadows wrote, Limits to Growth. That one of the problems that we don't understand is that generally there is no such thing as continuous growth. There just isn't. And if you want to look at that from an economic point of view, last weekend's Wall Street Journal did a very interesting article on talking about where after World War II, and myself particularly because I'm a boomer, we grew up in great middle class values and our economy was growing like crazy. And now, where is our economic growth? At what level? I lived in a time when it was 3, 4, 5%. Where is it right now? Where's our economic growth right now in terms of percentage over time? I mean, you hear constantly in the debates and all this stuff. So we're at 2%. That's our annual growth rate, 2%. So you have some people saying, well, I'm going to take it up to 5, 6%. You have other people, yeah, we're going to make it go. No, because when you look at historical data and you look at fluctuations over time, we're really back to normal the way it is. So the point is, what these behavior over time charts give you in any organization is a pretty good way to begin to understand the fluctuation in behavior around certain types of events. So that's one of the things that you begin to look at. So when you look at, a reinforcing loop coupled with a B, so let's look at supervisor supportive behavior. So I don't care if you're in a educational environment or if you're in a business environment. So what you have is a reinforcing loop. So if I'm trying to understand a supervisor's behavior of helping performance, the expectation basically is this, is that this person is going to help that person, which then will increase their performance, which then reinforces, the behavior of the supervisor doing a very good job. Then what happens is, so now you begin to add in some other variables to this, and what you begin to see is the hours worked. Now those S's mean they're going in the same direction. So supervisor's behavior. So you're increasing the amount of work hours for that supervisor. So you give them 10 people they're working with, and they're working hard at it. Well, what happens over time then is, what happens to the energy level of that individual in the organization goes in the opposite direction, and then you have a balancing loop, because what happens is their energy level begins to go down, and then that energy of working with that employee begins to dissipate. So in school districts, when you see where teachers will complain that as you reduce staff and increase the number of kids in a particular classroom, you could put that loop in there and see what happens over time. So it gives you a sense of what's going on within the flow of information within the organization. That's how you begin to map these things out. And when you get into those handouts I've given you, you'll see how this begins to play out, and it makes a lot of sense. So what you do is, so then you chart out this behavioral over time. What happens then is you look at the preferred level of what that supervisor's behavior should be with performance. And in the beginning, there's positive reinforcement going on. It gets good. But then what happens is, over time, what begins to take place is there's diminishing returns because of burnout of the individual. So see how these begin to tell you a story and allow you to visually see this in action, what the frameworks are about. And this will become I really think it will become a lot clearer to you as you get into those 3 articles I've given you. So any questions about this or any thoughts about this right now? Very simplistic, way of looking at this. And this is just a simple reinforcing loop with behavior of supervisory employee behavior and what happens over time, can happen over time. Comments about this?
I think that's what I'm living right now, Dr. Gould. As far as trying to, I'm not burnt out yet, but it is frustrating.
Yeah. But can you see how you could take this in your own way? Yeah, I lost you right there.
Just pushing the organization and, trying to get over some of the hurdles and people not wanting to change. And you keep pushing and pushing, and then you become disgruntled and, upset with some of the people that you're working with. And then that's where your energy level goes down. And, I think, it's a perfect example of dealing with situations.
But can you see that the more you understand the use of these archetypes, and there's many types of them, you'll see that. I'm not going to go, actually I'm going to move forward real quick because I don't want to burden you with, or oversaturate your thinking about this. But this becomes a pretty simple tool that you could look at any situation within your organization right now, substitute those boxes, and probably get a pretty good idea of what possibly might be going on. And then think about this, putting this out and letting everyone look at it and begin to talk about it and to play with it. Okay? So let me, so how do you make them work in real life? See, what Senge and his group basically says, and they have the data to back it up, is that the stories that are here really can help you to rapidly understand a situation and to diagram it to understand really what's going on inside the system. It's a powerful tool to do that. And let me see what my next one is. So basically what they do is they make the system visible. You can begin to understand what some of the structures are that are at play within that. Because remember, I said structure shapes behavior of people over time. Secondly, what they do is they're always occurring. Whether it be shifting the burden or fixes that fail, and these are very powerful archetypes to look at. And also, they're very easily transferable across any type of organization because they're universal. They shift the focus, and this is the most important thing as I try to accentuate, is that it moves you from trying to blame people for things to try to move to an inquiry to understand why it's happening. Because a lot of times people do things that, yeah, they end up getting blamed for, but it's the structure of the system and the mental models within that system that allow that to happen. So people are just functioning within the system. And the less awareness that people have about those, and this is where I say it gives you leverage to begin to understand is then what we end up doing is blaming people. And most of the times when we end up blaming people is we never solve the underlying reason for why that symptom appears. So that's very important. So it helps us to go deeper to enrich the structure, to understand, are there problems within the structure that we need to change? And if we change those structures, we might see change in behavior of people to function better towards what our desired future is all about. You say, I think? Yes. And then what they do is they draw out the implications for leverage intervention by helping to see the types of behaviors of the structure over time, what it's causing. So for example, if you have a teacher that constantly has discipline problems in their classroom, it could not necessarily be that they have bad discipline as much as the way in which they have their classroom structured as causing much of the problems, as opposed to their inability to deal with kids, because the way in which the structure of the classroom is organized, the physical structure of that classroom might allow for those types of behaviors to emerge out of the kid. So it gives you a different way to begin to think about these concepts. And then I just want to see what the next, okay. So now I don't want to go through the stories right now. I want to get to, let me, hang on one second. Let me go this way. I just want to go here so you'll have a sense of these. I think I have a slide that, yeah, here it is, here. So I'm going to kind of finish up with this slide because we're getting late into this and you're probably drifting right now because of all the information. So these are the ones that you're going to learn about and look at. So there's drifting goals, escalation, fixes that fail is a very important one that I want you to look at in the beginning, because what that's about is that we have a problem and then we come up with a solution, and what that solution does, it doesn't deal with the underlying problem, what's causing it. It only fixes the system, and then unintended consequences come up, and then that same problem keeps reemerging over and over again. So that's a very important one. Then you tie that into shifting the burden. What we do then is that when we find out that the fixes don't seem to work, then the tendency is we kind of shift it over to other people. So those two particularly you'll see in that handout I've given you. But here's some of the other ones. Success to be successful, tragedy to commons, that's a very important one. Accidental adversaries, attractiveness of principle. So these are the types of common stories that seem to be universal in all types of human relationships and organizations. But the two I really want you to focus on is fixes that fail, shifting the burden, followed by drifting goals. So those are the ones I really want you to read in that in those handouts and have a good sense about them. And then when we get back together again, what I want to do is spend a little time on that and have you work with some examples from your own environments. So within the Zoom itself, I'm going to put you into your groups and have you test these things out and then come back to the whole group and see what you find. Okay? So I think I'm going to end it at this particular point, give you a chance to kind of allow this stuff to percolate in your mind over time as you look at this. In the readings in Sengi I gave you, as I said to you on Sunday, you saw a couple of those, the reinforcing and the balancing loops, so you have a pretty good sense of what they are. They're not that difficult to understand, but you need to understand the causal loops and you need to understand the behavior over time to make the stories come alive. Okay? So with that, I'm just going to open up any questions or clarifications up to this point. Anything about, the assignment. And I told you, I did tell you guys what you'll be getting feedback from me on your last assignment on your theory of change. And hopefully you understand what the upcoming one is. I'll give you a little bit more detail on that on Sunday.
Where would we find the additional readings that we were looking at earlier?
When you go into the resource button, okay, you will see in there system archetypes in a folder.
Okay.
So go in there and just download them from there. If you have any problems with them, let me know. Okay?
Yep.
All right. So anything else? If not, you, as they say, are free to go. I'm going to stop the sharing. I can never get my mouse to go up there and stop the sharing. Okay, there we go. And that's it. And if you do have any, if you think about something overnight or tomorrow about this, feel free to email me any questions that you have. And I'm going to stop the recording.